there were angle issues and problems. I have a script. This is behind the scenes. This is. I was going to say it's for the blooper reel. You're here. You're at Fantasy Authors Handbook. It's all blooper reel. I have to change the tape. I'm taping with the blue painter's tape. My little thing that I actually wrote. I know you didn't come here to see me read from a script about Pilgrimage from Earth, a collection of science fiction stories by Robert Sheckley. Maybe I will just cut out all of that goofball nonsense at the beginning. Anyway, Robert Sheckley. Okay, we're going to talk about Pilgrimage to Earth, a collection of short stories by one of the great, really mid-list science fiction authors from starting really in the very early 50s. His first short story was published in 1951, and really kind of all the way up, at least through into the 70s, 80s, and so on. A native of Brooklyn, family moved, I guess, to New Jersey, whatever, but he graduated from high school in 1946, hit the road, hitchhiked to California. You know, like you do. This is apparently in the pre-rampant serial killer America. That's not it. I don't know. I wouldn't hitchhike across the country. Ended up serving in the Army in Korea for a couple of years, yeah. Then back east to NYU, got his degree there, sold his first short story in 1951, was called Final Examination, to Imagination. And again, back in these days, right now it's the very early 50s, 1951, still tons and tons of these great science fiction magazines, great or not so great, or versions of great. Just the fact that they were there, as far as I'm concerned, makes them great. Yeah, compared to where we are now, where we've got some good sort of webzines. Some of them are terrific, like serious contenders like Clark's World, right? And then there's the few, but then it's looking like, I don't know what's going on with that. That's maybe a video for another time. What's happening at Analog Asimovs and stuff. But you used to be able to, by the 50s, maybe not so much earn a living like the pulp guys back in the 20s and 30s were actually just had careers writing short stories. But he was out there getting published like crazy after, almost right away, right? This was originally published in this collection here, Pilgrimage to Earth, in 1957. In Signet, right? I have here what you are seeing, the third printing from August of 1964, a scant 1 month before your host here was born. Not, right? A little bit of, have I done this joke before? A little bit of spine leaning, but, for a 60-year-old, that's to be expected. But I found this just at whatever, probably half-price books. Or was it in one of those big boxes? See, I don't even remember, which is another reason why I'm doing the 100-book challenge, because it gets to the point where I had to finally just robustly populate Goodreads with all the books, or at least the big stacks of paperbacks that I had, because I was buying the same thing twice, 3 times. So it's, it was getting a little bit out of control. Anyway, 1964, third printing of this. Couldn't find the name of the cover artist. If you know, that's what the comments are for. That's the only thing that the comments are for. That's not true. That's not true. You should comment on all of these videos, like this one about Pilgrimage to Earth by Robert Sheckley from 1957. reprinted here for the third time, or printed for the third time in 1964. Why are we advertising for a Missioner book on the back of this? We don't know. Anyway, so we pick up with Mr. Sheckley here. Once he really started, he had that sort of first publication, and then it was just got to be crazy, right? Of the 15 stories collected in this anthology, or I'm sorry, collection, because we remember that collection is one author, anthology is multiple authors. I mix them up, but at least I know, and I do it accidentally. Of the 15 stories in this collection, were all originally published between 1954. I'm hiding behind this blank page. Between 1954 and 1956. So these are, again, publishing quickly. 15 stories in like a 2-year period. That's a lot by anybody's standards. And these, I don't think, are necessarily all of the stories that he had published during that time. Yeah. Most of the stories from here were original to Galaxy magazine, or originally published in Galaxy magazine, which the more of these old sci-fi collections and anthologies that I read, Galaxy was really crushing it in the 50s. They were ahead of the game. They were doing something that at the time Astounding wasn't doing. Astounding, of course, at the time being the hard science fiction magazine where you were like giving birth to the sort of engineer mathematician authors of Heinlein, Asimov. Galaxy was definitely, in the case certainly of these Sheckley stories, having more fun. And are they getting into what would eventually be called, or the beginnings of the sort of new wave science fiction? I guess so, right? But Galaxy just, when I read these, it's like, oh, where was that from? It's Galaxy for most of my favorite ones. All right, so we're going to take a look really quick at each of the stories in this book, which I will read aloud to you right now. I'm not going to do that. First story right away, the titular story. I can hear you. Grow up, people. The Pilgrimage to Earth. Darkly comedic riff on the post-love commercial dystopia. I'm kind of, I have my notes here. I'm looking down, so this is why it looks like I'm reading something. It's because, I'm reading something. Preparation. As I was going along, I would read a story and then quick put my thoughts on to Goodreads. Even if I'm apparently the last person standing there, I don't care. Whatever. Well, Goodreads is Goodreads. And I said, I'm not sure how I feel about this yet, right? But what the hell, right? You read it. You tell me what you think. Comments. A lot of these, pretty much all of these stories are going to be funny. You're going to hear the word fun, romp, silly, stuff like that. And normally I'm not that guy. Normally I kind of have an allergy to silly sci-fi, silly fantasy, which can very easily turn into the grotesquerie of Spaceballs. And I know if you're a fan of that, we need to talk, because it was a giant insult to anyone who has ever actually liked science fiction. Drove me insane. I hate that movie so very, very much. Why are we even talking about that? But, and so, that kind of thing I'm normally really guarded against. Sheckley nailed it. He told, first of all, great science fiction stories at the heart. And then there was a kind of a funny mix-up and a misunderstanding, and characters who had a sense of humor, and it felt organic, it felt real, and it never felt like, Board of the Rings or something like that, right? Or Spaceballs, where we're making, look at how dumb the people who like this are, right? And so a good story, I think, to lend the title for. It's an interesting title, right? A very sci-fi title, Pilgrimage to Earth. So, do I have a strong opinion on that one? Do I have to read a couple of these again? Maybe. And I almost never read whole books more than once, but there are certain short stories that I've read. I like 5, 6, 7, 8 times, right? Some of the H.P. Lovecraft stories, a bunch of the Harlan Ellison stories, things that I've just like, I'm just going to read that again because, wow, right? I might read this again, not because I was wow, but because I feel like I would be wow if I try it one more time. Anyway, the second story, All the Things You Are. Do I have to show this? You believe me that the stories are in there and that they each have a title page. And if you don't, I'm going to keep quivering, and I'm going to get all shaky until you. Okay. All the Things You Are. Get ready for that word, fun. Fun little first contact comedy of errors with a terrific opening line. I'm going to read it for you. This is the opening line. Let me get to it so you can read along on the video while I look down at my notes. There are regulations to govern the conduct of first contact spaceships, rules drawn up in desperation and followed in despair. For what rule can predict the effect of any action upon the mentality of an alien people? Right, how about that? Right, a short story that begins with essentially a statement of purpose. This is what this story is about. I'm going to tell you that this is going to go wrong, right? We're going to contact an alien species, and it's just not going to work. How could it work? Why would it work? Let's go. And I said it was fun. It was fun. It was little. It was very short. None of these stories are super, super long. You'll see that the whole book with 15 short stories is like all of 168 pages, something like that. Okay. The next story was called Trap. This one was, again, just fun. And it's a fun with transporter story. It's good for a few laughs. The transporter. And this is going back into the, 10 years more than 10 years before Star Trek. It's just that machine, right? That sci-fi invention that you think, ooh, yeah, that would be cool, right? Because you could just get from here to there really super fast. There's no commute time. You're just like, oh, I got to get in the transporter. And you get in the transporter, and in the, fraction of a second, you're just at work, or you're at the mall, or you're at the movie theater, or you're at the casino, or whatever, right? Like, let's just go to Vegas for the afternoon, and you're there. But then the more anyone begins to think about that technology, the more it's like, well, I'm going to get in here, kill myself, and a duplicate will appear in Vegas. Right? Is that what it is? Right? And lots of authors, Christopher Priest, obviously, in The Prestige, had kind of a lot to say about this technology or version of that technology. Trap is Robert Sheckley just having a good old goof with it. And speaking of goof, the body, again, the word fun, because it was fun. Short, high concept goof, right? That Sheckley pulled off with great humanness and good-natured humor. Humanness and humor. And that was the thing, right? They're fun little stories. They're silly stories. They're meant to say, oh, we are all a bunch of dummies doing a bunch of dummy stuff in space. And just because we can get to space doesn't mean we ain't dummies. But there's people in here. There's characters in here. Yeah? Not just, why do we do this? Why do we get on Heinlein's case? I don't know. But I've read a bunch of his early short stories, and it's faceless engineer guy solves an engineering problem. The end. And there was never really, not never, but you had to kind of go like, and you are? Sheckley does a great job of, these are the people who are stuck in this kind of awful thing that's going on. Early model, right? This one I think is really typifies the entire collection, if not apparently Sheckley's kind of whole approach to at least the sci-fi short story. And that whole thing is kind of in that we invented this awesome machine, right? Whether it's some sort of a transporter or this protective suit that this guy is wearing. And it's going to be great. It's going to be awesome. Oh my God, this is just the big, great invention. This is the best thing ever. ChatGPT is going to fix the world. And then it turns out to be a disaster. A disaster. And this is kind of what these stories are. Like, don't build it because you can. Think about, should you? Don't give it to a guy who's alone on an alien planet until you know that it works. Yeah? Which makes this silly story, and it is a silly story, really intriguing, right? And again, I had a professor in college, I really went to film school, who said, you don't have to be serious to be profound. And I always remembered that. Who knows? He may have been quoting Aristotle, for all I know. But he's right. You know, just because you're laughing doesn't mean that person doesn't have something to say. Right? Sheckley. Why Sheckley? Why read this? Why do I have a video that's this long about what appears to be one of those throwaway little books that you get super cheap, and you're like, oh, what's this? Right? And then probably just pass it by because the cover art is kind of meh. And, you know, but contained within is this great stuff. But in this one, early model, we see this, right? Thoughtlessly designed technology that just tragically intersects with personal political relationships even, right? And, you know, I was making fun of ChatGPT, which I think is a horrible invention. And because it is. And has this story, they're doing a completely different machine, come true in these sad and tragic ways since this original 1956 publication. Just because it's been the better part of 70 years. Listen to the science fiction writers, y'all. Let's take a breather and maybe calm down, because we're talking about this fun book of fun stories by a really fun author. Let's take a breather. Earth Pilgrims, I'm back. Thank you for enjoying that brief pause while I actually taped up the second page of my little script behind the scenes. I did not see the end, right? Really what is honestly a punchline of the story, Disposal Service coming, a super short sci-fi joke, really. And it works. It worked on me. I didn't feel disrespected. That's not a word. I guess there has to be at least one miss in any collection, though, yeah. The story Human Man's Burden, which we know the reference to that, I think, don't we? Is this interfering with the microphone, this change? I don't know anything about broadcasting. This one, this was a struggle. It's just so hopeless. And this is something that happens when you read sci-fi from the 50s. Anything really from the 50s for the most part. It's just hopelessly steeped in these like rigid, old school gender role stuff. 1956. This is a good example if you want to have sort of, and I sometimes you have to unfortunately have like negative examples, right? But this is one of the examples, and you could definitely hold this story up for this purpose, of science fiction authors that could easily imagine changes to technology, right? We can imagine a transporter. We can imagine this suit that's supposed to protect you from anything and then ends up having some kind of fatal flaw, right? We're predicting AI and so on. But just seem unable to imagine social change. That somewhere between 1956 and the future, often the authors are pegging as 2010 or what 2025 or whatever, then they're like, oh, there's going to be cities on Mars. Clearly there aren't, but it will be like gasp. There's a woman in the crew. Like, is that possible? There's no way. And on one of my starships, there'd be a woman. That kind of thing. I'm going deeper than this story needs, right? But they just sort of, and I think this is Sheckley again. You got to also remember that Sheckley is writing a story in 1956 about 1956 because science fiction isn't really meant to predict the future. They'll say, I know, it seems like these rockets will be able to take us farther and farther, faster and faster, et cetera, et cetera. Great, we'll kind of do that world building. But really I'm talking about, right, whatever, the rise of the oligarchical system like 1984 and so on, right? It's about what's happening today. So, yeah. Anyway, I think it's certainly for younger readers who just really, I was kind of born into the end of that, so I don't really, right? I didn't really, and if you had met my mother, you knew that there was no trad wife at home for Dad. So it feels weird to me, and I think somebody who's 20 something now, as opposed to older when 20 something, may struggle with understanding what these people are even talking about. That I think it's so much that you might lose the sci-fi thread and start thinking that the story is that, right? That it's like, it's like it's Handmaid's Tale. Like that can't be the way people actually thought, right? Or that he's thinking that in the future people are going to think that way. That's not true. All right, so we're going to shed that one. Because remember, we're in fun and silly, except when you get to this one. Fear in the Night, short but effective psychological horror story that does not belong in here at all, right? It is completely out of place with the rest of the sort of snarky, silly SF tales. I don't know how this one snuck in there, except that it's the best story. I hate using the word best. It was my favorite story in the entire collection. This is really good. I want to read more horror by Robert Sheckley. That's going to be an agenda item in my life. Yeah? Fear in the Night. If anything, see if you can find that story just out in the world and read that, if not the rest of these. And we'll get to Bad Medicine. Is this taking too long? I don't care. I'm just going to keep talking. You can come and go as you want. Again, 1956. Entertaining tale of AI psychotherapy gone terribly wrong. Who could have predicted that? That using some kind of jumped up autofill as a psychotherapist is probably not going to work. We're going to try not to get angry. So this is set in a future controlled by, again, writing from 1956 about the world of 1956, kind of projected into the future. The government, the culture, the country, or it seems like the world is really controlled by old economy corporations. He's name dropping General Motors and IBM. But if you just sort of in your head sub in the social media or the big tech giants for what used to be the driving forces of the economy, General Motors, and and you see these because it's obviously why would like General Motors be building a therapy machine? It makes no sense. So if you swap out General Motors or whatever from Meta, Google, right? Um, he's freakishly accurately predicting, right, this current tendency to act on bad advice from ill-conceived bots. Yes. What if something that doesn't know what the gets talking about starts giving you the answers? I wonder if that maybe could go terribly, terribly wrong. And I wonder if there was anybody out there who were trying to say, here's something not to build from almost 70 years ago. I feel like I'm getting preachy. I don't know if you've heard that I have a very anti-AI stance because I'm a living human. Protection, also from 1956. This one begins with the question, what if an alien intelligence made itself known to a random human and that guy just did not give a fraction of a fuck? This is why you read this anthology. This is the kind of attitude that our man Sheckley has. Like, love this. This was a good one. Earth, Air, Fire, and Water from 1955. Tight little survival tale. Yeah, based on a wildly inaccurate imagining of what it's like on the surface of Venus. Yeah. And I think, honestly, in 1956, Sheckley, if he had read a book about Venus, probably wouldn't have had a guy stuck in a snowstorm on Venus. But, again, we don't come to Robert Sheckley for scientific accuracy, except when he tells you that AI is bad. Deadhead, 1955. This is another one that feels a little bit prophetic, or is still a warning against let's just let Elon Musk colonize Mars himself. So in this one, we get a look at the early days of a Mars colony, right? It's not yet self-sufficient, and it's dealing, and in the story, the character here is dealing with what they call a deadhead, which is a stowaway, a guy who got on one of these transport ships to Mars on Earth, as a stowaway, just hit on there. And then he gets to Mars and he's like, I'm on Mars. This is great. Meanwhile, Mars is an arid desert planet, and he has a little bit more atmosphere there, so it's like you have to kind of wear a mask, and he plays around with you can't necessarily just keep breathing forever on the surface of Mars, but whatever. But he is saying, like, this is a research station. You have to apply to be here. It's extremely selective. Most of the people who apply, mega PhDs doing significant research, are refused. This station only has this amount of air, this amount of food, this amount of water. You can't just show up and live here. Right? So this is the problem. Then there's a really surprising and really interesting ending. Short stories are all about two things: the beginning and the ending. It's the first sentence and the last sentence that makes a short story work. This one ends in a very surprising way. Yeah? And that's all I'm going to say, because you're going to go ahead and read this book. You are going to read this book. The Academy, this is one of the earlier ones, 1954. There's a quote in here. I don't know if did I mark up the page? I don't think I did. I think I just took a photograph of it and copied the text down. So I'm just going to hold this up and read it. And maybe there'll be some fancy pictures not generated by Midjourney. Good Lord, man. Don't you understand anything about social sanity, responsibility, and stasis? I was on my way to becoming wealthy. From there, I would have founded a financial empire. After that, Who knows where I would have gone? Into indirect control of the government eventually. I'd want to change the psychological policies to conform to my own abnormalities. This is envisioning a world where the next potential tech bro billionaire is horrified at the prospect of being the next big tech bro. Wow. This one, we're going to need to take another pause. Boy, I hope this tape is still sticky. We're on page 3. Milk Run. Oh. If you're one of the few people in the known universe who doesn't understand how complicated it can be to transport smags, Fergles, and Queels through space, you'll want to study Milk Run, 1954. Somebody needs to adapt this story into a traveler adventure because this, I swear to God, Mark Miller read the short story and said, ooh, that would be cool for a role-playing game. Okay? This is the story about guys who run a free trader, and it is delightful. Which brings me to the very last. Pardon me. I'm getting choked up because now it's almost over, and I'm going to have to turn this off and take the tape off and then recycle the script that I printed out. This is really Lifeboat Mutiny, the last story. It's a sequel to Milk Run, basically, or it carries the same characters, right? These two guys who run this like interstellar shipping company, they have just this one very traveler free trader kind of ship. That's Gregor and Arthur. In this one, they find themselves in the care of an AI robot that thinks they're reptilian soldiers from a long extinct species, and that they're still fighting a war against another extinct species, which is hard to say. Extinct species. Notice that you can see me, and I'm actually mispronouncing stuff and clearing my throat because I'm not a pretend voice made by a computer. I promise I won't always be preaching anti-AI propaganda. But at this point, I know that you just sort of feel it radiating from me. Is AI bad? A running theme in this anthology or collection? Why do I keep saying that? If ChatGPT wouldn't make that mistake. AI is bad. It is a running theme through this. There's a little bit of it in here. Not everything, not every story. There's a lot of it in here, right? Don't let machines make decisions for you or pretend to help you. In the mid 1950s, this is a great example of why we should still be reading science fiction from 70 years ago. It's just unsettlingly prophetic in some ways, in a way that says it's not difficult to imagine that we shouldn't be depending on machines to make human decisions. We should not be careless in the way we create technology and use technology, right? And that talking to other people is hard, but it requires a human to human contact. Yeah? Even if the other human is an alien or a Russian, right? Or a Republican. And then right there's the story that references a racist kind of thing that people used to say, and that depends on these like very Leave It to Beaver kind of clanky gender politics, um, which really says, and there's no way to know that this is true except to live another 60 years and then see what people are saying. But for those of you who are younger and might live for another 60 years, read this now and then think about what will the science fiction, this isn't the science fiction section, the science fiction books are over there. The science fiction published this year read like in 2095. Right? Will people be reading Cory Doctorow and going, oh, he doesn't even know the half of it? Right? Are they going to be reading what? Whoever, and just be thinking, wow, nailed it. Or, yeah, or back then they should have listened to themselves about climate change, says the last 5 people on Earth living in a bubble under the ocean. That's not going to happen. I don't know, but maybe it will. We don't know, right? But we can imagine that, and it will be up to people 60 years from now to hold this in front of some version of a camera on some version of a social media platform and say, read this. It's weird. It's in many ways a goof, but it also gets you thinking about stuff that's happening right now that is not good, that is promised to be good, could be better. Pilgrimage to Earth by Robert Sheckley. This is currently available. Open Road Media actually has published it for Kindle, so you can go get this for your Kindle if you're still a Kindle person. But paperbacks like this, you can find this out there for like less than $5 probably. Again, this isn't first edition Philip K. Dick. So it's not even first edition Robert Sheckley. It's just out there. If you've got a decent used bookstore in your neighborhood, it might be just sitting there. If you run across it, if anything about any of these stories has made you think, you know what, this sounds like fun, and it is fun, go get this book one way or another. Yeah. All right. So I finished reading this on July 7th, and I am recording this on the 18th. So that's how far behind I am on these videos, right? I'm going to do math in my head. That's 11 days. If I got that right, please congratulate me in the comments. If I got it wrong, what do you want from me? What's the next video? Druna number 5. That has been completed for almost 11 days. I got to talk about that one. Big deadline energy is happening still. You know the drill on that. It's going to be this way through until like the first week in August. But we'll start getting caught up. And we will start reading again. There's a lot of books I've been just sort of not paying any attention to for like weeks on end. I'm going to get back to that. You must like, it's that button. You know how to do this. How are you not subscribed? After all this, you're not subscribed? You think this is just comes here by man? Subscribe. Comment. Do all that stuff. Whatever else you do, keep reading. All these books over here, almost all of which I haven't read yet. Keep reading. Keep writing. And keep watching. Oh. Thank y'all. This is the subscribe, I think, up here probably. Let me get it's pinching my shoulder. This is the video that an algorithm will decide you should watch next. And you're going to argue with Google's algorithms? Who do you think you are?